And so we partner with states, we partner with federal government, we partner with city and county governments to help pay for these things because they see the need and they see basically the impact that providing that affordable housing has on their communities and also their economies, because they know that if we actually provide a stable place to call home, then we have, less hospital visits, less homeless, less poor education.
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes, and that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else with your hosts, John Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grinzik. With me, as always, is John Cohen. How we doing?
Good. Same stuff, different day. Mm-hmm. The days are blending together.
I was going to say, is it even different day anymore? Is it same stuff, same day? Because it feels
same
like all
stuff. Same. Who knows what day? Same stuff. Who knows what day? Right now, it's there's no. Normally we have a deal going on or something we're working on. We're offering. I'm offering is half-ass, right? We got a deal sent to us that we sold to somebody that I offered less than when we bought it the first time. So I don't know if that's considered an offer or not, but yeah, man, the days are just blending together. It's different, but I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm excited for what happens.
I don't know. I feel weird. Like a couple cities are obviously opening up, and it'll be interesting to hear, what Evan hears because he's in Nashville, and it sounds like they're starting to open some stuff up. But I feel like New York's going to be so wary from starting to open stuff back up, and they're going to take a real long time to do it. So I think most of the country is going to be opened up before we are. So I don't know. I don't see the light necessarily yet.
Yeah. It's a faint light, but I know Nashville just got a report from Marcus Millichap. They did each of the counties and how they plan on opening. That it literally just came out right before this podcast. But it'll be interesting. It'll definitely be interesting.
For sure. So for anybody wondering, it's April 24th. So if anything changes by the time this comes out, keep that in mind. But with that being said, got a great guest on today. Evan Holladay, good friend, is doing some really good stuff down in Nashville. Some really interesting stuff, and has his own platform, his own podcast, and is really good at giving back and helping people, learn and grow and stuff like that. So super excited to have him on. So with that being said, Evan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me, guys.
Awesome. You want to take a couple minutes, just tell everybody, if they don't already know, who you are, where you're from, what you do, and your background and stuff like that.
Let's dive in.
Yeah, man.
So a little bit about me. I like to tell people it got started for me really in college. I was going the pre-med route. Thought I wanted to be a doctor. Thought I wanted to be an anesthesiologist. Realized very quickly I hate science. I hate chemistry. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But when I was in college, I realized I was like, man, there's a really cool $55 million mixed use development, student housing. It's got 12 retailers. It's got new market tax credits. It's got all these things going on. And I was like, man, I don't know much about real estate, but that sounds really cool. And I told one of my mentors at the time, just kind of offhand, and one thing leads to another. And he's like, hey, I can introduce you to the owner developer if you'd like. I was like, yeah, let's make it happen. And from there, I basically impressed him, brought a bunch of people out to the groundbreaking, and I was the first one he hired to really help bring that development out of the ground. We pre-leased it, and really just management, working with the retailers, and learning that I didn't want to be in property management. I wanted to do what he was doing.
Right.
And so that kind of segued into me and a few others in college. We started a modular development company. Again, we're not really knowing what we were doing at first. We're very naive and just saying, oh, we're going to do a modular development company. And we actually took the same layout as in actual manufacturing plants that designed and developed houseboats in Kentucky. They just laid off 1,100 skilled workers after the housing market crash in 2008, which I feel like we're going to have this conversation 10 years from now about COVID-19, but it was basically us trying to say, how can we put those 1,100 skilled workers who have the craft, who have the knowledge, who have the skills, but aren't working in these factories that are literally dormant, that are not being used, and literally take the same rectangular box shape as a houseboat and turn it into modular housing that we just put on foundations instead of put on water. And so that really kind of took off, and we were like, well, let's start with single family. We built a few single family. We're trying to scale that up to multifamily. And that's when I met a very reputable development group, and they're like, how about you come work with us and do that same thing, but with the affordable housing, workforce housing component, which was part of our plan at the modular company, because we're like, how can we not just build housing for luxury, high-end, market rate, $2,000 a month rent? How can we actually build something that is going to have a positive impact on the community and provide housing for all income ranges? And so that's when I started learning more about tax credits, more about affordable workforce housing, and learning that this is really just housing for the backbone of the community, for those making $30,000 to $70,000 a year, who make our economy run and make it what it is today, but yet are literally getting pushed out because nobody's providing housing for them. Majority of new developments now are going Class A or A plus, and so you're not seeing that supply equal demand. And so that's what it just kind of hit me. I was like, man, we really need to focus in on this. So I ended up working with that development group. They're one of the biggest affordable developers in the country, and learned a whole lot there. Ended up doing over 1,300 units across the Southeast, and really, really found my passion in affordable workforce housing. And then so the last year we started Holladay Ventures, where we focus in on not just the affordable workforce housing component, but we take it a step further. We say, let's provide the housing and let's actually empower the residents so they can live the best life that they can, by giving them podcasts, by giving them mindset training, by giving them financial literacy training, by giving them, what they need, the tools they need on the healthcare side, on the education side, tutoring for kids. We're partnering with nonprofits to help implement that. But that's really what I'm passionate about, is how can we take housing and make it into a positive impact on the community, while also making great returns for our investors and having lasting impact on the residents and the communities.
Oh man, I think it's a phenomenal story. I think it's awesome. Just want to get a little bit more context just on a couple of things. With the modular stuff you were doing, is that something you've continued to do over the years, as a full-time or on the side? Did it stop? And how big did that end up getting?
Yeah, so I was leading the company, leading the charge. I was probably the one most passionate about housing and development in the group. And so when I left to join the development company and learn from them, the company kind of stopped what we were doing. Mm-hmm. But modular's always been part of what I'm passionate about as well, because I see that there's massive potential for modular to basically help us cut costs, cut time to market. I know Marriott is now going global with saying, I think most of their new developments are now modular, wow. Especially up in the Northeast, where cost of construction and cost of goods are so expensive. It's becoming more and more relevant, especially now. We have such a lack of supply of skilled laborers on the construction side. That's constantly an issue that we talk with our contractors about. They're like, hey, prices are going up every 6 months because they just can't find good laborers. I think COVID-19 is going to have an impact on that. I think there's going to be more supply of workers. But then again, this is probably going to be a continuing problem unless we have massive educational efforts into, training actual trade jobs. So I always think modular is going to continue to be more and more prevalent, and it's going to continue to be more efficient. So it's definitely something we've talked about, how we can implement on future developments. So stay tuned.
Interesting. So does modular then require less people per square foot or per stage than the way it's built, so that the need for the skilled labor is significantly less? Is that how that works?
That's a good question. I don't know the per if it's done at a warehouse or if it's done on site.
Hmm.
But I do know basically the model where if you do it in a factory, you have almost like full-time workers and you have like more of a steady workflow,
Gotcha.
because you have a roof over your
Hmm.
construction site more or less. So you're able to keep a constant flow of work. So that is the upside for the skilled workers, is that they'll have more constant work.
Gotcha. And I'm sure
I
also,
know.
go ahead.
No, you first.
I was going to say, I'm sure too, it removes a lot of the risk and uncertainty too with a work site of, are we working today? Are we not? Is it unsafe conditions? Is it not? If you're in a,
Yeah.
massive warehouse with, like you said, 4 walls on either side and a roof over your head, you just, you show up and you go to work. You don't necessarily have to worry about that stuff. So that's an interesting point. What were you saying, John?
Yeah, what I was going to say is I know that that modular it's extremely interesting across the board. We actually almost got into a partnership with a development in Farmingdale right by us, and the guy wanted to do modular construction, multifamily, and he struggled on the financing component when you go a little bit bigger because the bank can't necessarily inspect or know the stage of it. So I don't know how much you know or not. Can you speak to that? Because I think, I agree with everything you said. And I think what you're doing is awesome, from what what you told us, and what I know. I think, that's the side that, always intrigued me. We own a site too that I thought would be a perfect, site for something like that. But the challenge was always, the bank wanted, you want to put down money, and then the bank wants to fund draws, but they can't check to see if the plumbing's installed right or something like that. So can you speak to anything else? I think that's a component that, I don't know if we wanted to go down this path or not, but I know that's something that's been,
That's interesting.
It's been changing, but it hasn't fully changed yet.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I've been talking to a lot of lenders and even equity groups about this, because that to me as well is like the biggest hurdle you need to cross. And I've talked to other developers who have done modular, and a couple different ways that they've solved for it is, first off, finding creative financing lenders that are actually willing and able to go to the site and inspect, or the factory, wherever it is. That's number one. Also, having vertical integration. A lot more of the bigger developers are actually building and owning their own factories where they're creating the modular components. That way they can almost like finance their own construction on the front end. Because that's the other thing too, is you're basically, a lot of the factories want 25, 50% upfront deposit for them to even get started on the work. Well, we all know that's not how construction works or funding works. They want to do it, pari passu as you complete construction, and with the construction draws. So that's something as well. It's like you can possibly have your equity front load that, or work with a construction lender, or have an outside investor that'll take that little bit of risk up front and cover the construction deposit until the lender is able to inspect, and you can actually bring it and install it on site.
Yeah, because that's always been that was like when we were doing it. He said the biggest challenge he was running into was the builder or the modular construction group. They wanted a ton of money down to go, and the bank wasn't going to give it until basically it's like Legos, and you're just putting it together at the end, because it's all built. It gets dropped off at the site and it's done. Plumbing's done, the roughs are done. So that was the component. And we said, if you can provide us with the bank that will do it the way we want to do it, we'll do it. Take his valuation off the table, because that was another thing that killed the deal. But because that's a super compelling. I just think it makes a ton of sense, because it's an assembly line, right? Like the Model T, Ford. I mean, exactly. If you can do that, you should be able to get. You don't have to worry about the elements or the what ifs. The stuff that we're off a little bit, and that's the stuff that just kills you. And that the modular side takes that off the table. So that's awesome what you're doing, and even those 3 creative ways. Either the vertical integration makes sense, even an investor piece for that first down payment, and a guy that's willing to take a little bit of a risk. That's awesome. So, that's one, potential hurdle that you can get over by using any of that. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was actually just talking to our architect yesterday morning about an urban deal we're working on right now. And he basically said, he's like, you think about each unit as like in 12-foot modules. And he's like, a studio is going to be 1.5 modules. A 1-bedroom is going to be 2 modules. A 3-bedroom or 2 bedrooms is going to be 3 modules, so on and so forth. But literally the way we're building buildings already, even without the modular, it's almost like we're building it in a modular component because that's the most efficient way to design and build once you're on site. So I think it's going to make it a lot quicker for us and as costs go up, it's going to make it a lot easier to transition to modular. But you're right. I think financing is a big piece. The other thing is the front end of financing of that, because you think about to gain the best advantage of the modular process, you have to sometimes start the modular process before you can actually close on your construction. So financing it before takes a little bit of risk, but I think if you can be creative, then you can solve for that.
Why is that? Explain that a little bit.
So to gain the best efficiencies or quickness to market, basically, if you think about you have your site work, and that takes 6 to 10 months depending on your site, and then the actual time it takes to build the modular components. I don't know exactly what that time frame is. I think it's 8 to 12 months. But if you think about the timing of those two, you want them to match up perfectly so you don't have any downtime on site.
Right.
And so you may need to actually get started on the modular build out in the factory before you're actually starting your site work, which is, it makes it a little messy as far as construction financing, because usually you don't want to start anything until you get your construction loan.
So is there any reason that you, and maybe you are doing this, but you wouldn't just underwrite the deal for 12-month start time and accounting for downtime to eliminate that upfront risk taken beforehand, instead of trying to align it perfectly, which adds an additional amount of risk? I understand why you want it, right? Nobody wants downtime. You want seamless transition from one phase to the next. But is that even a realistic expectation for a deal, or no?
Yeah, I mean, you could. I think people are doing that now already. Is they're just waiting till that construction loan to release everything. So it's not unheard of. It's just, if you want to get the most kind of bang for your buck on the modular as far as timing, then you would have to possibly get it started a little earlier.
Interesting. Do you think that if and when modular becomes a more popular construction technique, that would help eliminate some of that time difference, where if it was more factories, a quicker process, or a better understanding of how it works, do you think that timeline shrinks and that disappears, or do you think that's just for the foreseeable future, that's how it's going to be?
Yeah, I think I've been kind of paying attention to where the factories are coming up and where they're being announced, and I've just noticed even around us in Nashville. I mean, previously the closest modular factory was in Pennsylvania. So it was a 6-7 hour drive to anywhere in the Midwest, from Kentucky down to Georgia, which seems crazy. And so then within the last year, I've seen one announced outside of, I think it was Paducah, Kentucky, and one was announced outside of Georgia, or Atlanta in Georgia, both by real estate groups who are going to build for other groups and then also build internally for their own developments. But I think you're seeing more and more pop up across the whole country. So as soon as we get to a tipping point where it's hey, you're always going to be 2 hours away from a modular development plant, or at least major metros, and you get that competitiveness amongst all the factories, I think you're going to hit a tipping point as those costs go down and on-site construction costs keep going up.
So how does a 4-hour difference in travel time, convert to, a few months in saving overall? Is it just there's so many trips back and forth and you only want to use so many trucks that just by, adding all those hours together, it equates to multiple months?
Yeah, it's that. And then also just the cost of bringing the modular on site, being able to lower that cost is pretty significant.
Gotcha. And then I know you have a couple projects either in the process of being built or going through site work or under contract. Can you talk a little bit about those, and are they modular, or are they not? How are you using different resources to be in that affordable component? Because I know we started talking about it a little bit on the Instagram live stuff, Would really like to hear more about that and, help some of our listeners understand where the opportunity is.
Yeah. So right now we're not doing any modular, but definitely do want to be doing that in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And then as far as what we're doing it and how we're doing it and where the opportunity is, we are typically we're financing workforce affordable housing. So really, like if you think about average median income, we're typically helping families at 60 to 80% of area median income. Mm-hmm. So Nashville, that's 30 to 75,000. It depends on what city you're in, but that's roughly kind of a good average for most metros. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the income band that we help. Now there's groups that help even lower than that. The way we're set up and structured, we typically help that kind of like middle income band. And so we partner with states, we partner with federal government, we partner with city and county governments to help pay for these things because they see the need. And they see basically the impact that providing that affordable housing has on their communities and also their economies, because they know that if we actually provide a stable place to call home, then we have less hospital visits, less homeless, less poor education. It just has this ripple effect on everything as far as an economy and how it's set up and how it can be more efficient by actually providing good quality housing that's brand new housing that's almost like Class A apartments, but yet at an affordable price point where people aren't spending more than 30% of their paycheck. So that's typically what we go for. Is we can't charge any more than 30% of our residents' paycheck each month. Mm-hmm. And so what that, in return for doing that, we are awarded tax credits, which we then sell to investors and that helps finance the development along with the loan. And then we put in some of our own capital as well. But the goal is really creating long-term workforce affordable housing. The requirements, if you get the tax credits, requirements to keep it affordable are 15 years from the federal government. And then each state usually adds on another 15 years. And so we're most of the time we're building brand new 200 plus unit communities in mostly urban areas, some suburban. And then we're also doing acquisition as well. We're buying, fixing up existing affordable communities and keeping them, maintaining long-term affordability. So that's where we're operating in right now. As far as opportunity, I think that given what's going on right now, the demand is going to just skyrocket. Mm-hmm. And a lot of families are going to be downsizing. They're going to be looking at how they can cut every single cost they have, and usually rent or mortgage is one of their biggest, if not the biggest. And so I think you're going to see a lot more families that are going to qualify for workforce and affordable housing, and going to not just qualify, but actually need that in order to basically be able to afford, moving forward as a family out of this. And so I think hopefully this will also bring a lot more light to the fact that housing is kind of the stability of a local economy and of a community. And hopefully that more funding will actually go into this and creating, it's really, at the end of the day, it's just supply and demand, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lack of supply that meets the demand for workforce affordable housing. So we need to incentivize more units being built and more units being kept affordable. And so I think that's where we're headed, given everything that's going on, and also how literally all we have right now is our housing. And that's where we're living 24/7. So hopefully people can take that into mind. And it's like, hey, let's try to provide good quality housing for families, given that a lot of times that's all they have right now.
That's like, I think I posted an article from Multi-Housing News today that, at first, when this first came out, a lot of people spoke about the downward pressure on the affordable stuff, the C space, because those were the tenants that were immediately losing their jobs. The retail, the hospitality, those people were getting, cut. And those are, your workforce housing people. And, we started buying mobile home parks because the apartment space, there's no such thing as affordable housing anymore. It's just gone completely off the rails. Yeah. some apartments we own, in Columbus, we bought for the simple purpose that we knew we can go and fix it. They're not tax credits or affordable by any means, but where they're located, it was very solid, safe, clean places to be after we got in and did our renovations. So I think what you're doing is awesome. And what I posted today online, it was an article written that, there might have been initial downward pressure on the affordable C, class stuff. But I think the A-class stuff could see this hurt a lot worse, because I know myself as an individual, where I would live, it would be, your A apartment community. And looking at it now, I would think twice, about that. If I can have a better place to live, safe, cleaner, and I can cut my rent by whatever, 20%, 15%, whatever it is, that extra money savings, I think that, like you said earlier before we started, I think in 10 years, we're going to be talking about COVID-19 and not the Great Recession or whatever it is. I think people are going to look at this as, cash is king. And if I don't have to spend all my money on my rent, okay, I got a doorman and a gym, and they have an Amazon package center that I don't have to do shit. I think this is going to impact the higher class stuff a lot more, because there's been so much new build and so much new construction. What is lease up going to be like? And that's the part that intrigues me about the future is there going to be opportunity to come in and buy that stuff because it's messed up and you could now operate it more affordably? Or is it just going to add that much pressure, and that B and C place and that affordable stuff are just going to get that much more demand because people realize, okay, this is a really good place to live. It's in a nice part of town. I can live here and just as satisfied, and I'm not paying an arm and a leg. So I think it's really intriguing to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think at the end of the day, and I know you guys know this, anybody that's in apartments, anybody that's in multifamily investing, anybody that's owning rental property right now is for the next 5 to 10 years is going to be in a great position, because exactly what's happening, or what happened in 2008, you had this massive group of millennials that were ready to purchase their first home that just got their entire life savings wiped out. And we just had it again, like 10 years later. So the millennials just got whacked twice in 10 years. And so now they're going to be like, okay, well, you have the younger part of the millennials that are going to be like, well, I was going to buy a house, but now I don't have any cash for that, or I don't have nearly enough. And so I'm going to rent for another 5 years. And so you're going to see this demand for rental across the board from A to C minus. I think you're going to have higher demand for rental. I think you're right, though. I mean, Class A, I think that's probably going to have the slowest growth. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's going to be a lot less construction starts for Class A in the next 2 to 3 years. And hopefully a lot more on the workforce side, given that there's just demand is going to skyrocket for that.
I agree.
Do you think any current developments that maybe are going through their groundwork or whatever they need to do, do you think there are any that are going to no longer be built over the next 6 to 12 months because of what's going on? Like anything that's been in the pipeline, approved and started that might just, hey, not worth it anymore. We're not going to develop. We're going to either sit on the land or sell it for a loss or whatever. And how abundant is that going to be?
I think it's going to be at least for the next, I can't put a timetable on it, but of course, all 6 to 12 months at least. I think. I mean, I've already had landowners call me and say, "Hey, this other developer was supposed to close in March, and they sunk like $500,000 into this site, and they walked away."
Wow.
And I've heard that multiple times. And then a partner of mine on one deal, he has a condo site that's ready to go. And he was about to break ground in April. And he said, no, I'm going to hold off. He owns the land, so he'll develop it at some point. But it's just an example of he had plans. He had GC ready to go. They were going to move dirt. And he last minute was like, no, let's hold off. Let's not close yet. Let's see where this thing plays out. And I think you're going to see that delay of the process. I mean, we're trying to do it internally. We're not slowing things down, but trying to spend as little money as we can by still pushing the project forward, but not spending as much on the pre-development side as we probably would have 2 months ago.
I think that's important because we're always very cognizant of what the new pipeline looks like. Like you said, lifeblood of this industry is supply and demand, and John talks about it all the time. And, I think most people do. Your new development pipeline is going to have some sort of effect on any type of real estate that's owned, especially if it's, rentals and multifamily. Even if you're in the B, C space, you're still going to be affected one way or the other, because those are units that need to be filled. Those are units that need to be absorbed, et cetera. But I think it's interesting if that, there was 3,000 units coming online over the next 2-3 years, what does that turn into over the next 2 to 3 years? Does everything just get delayed another year and a half, 2 years? Do, 10% of units not get built, 20, 30? Is there, a spike in development once this settles down, or is there a long drag? I definitely don't understand that concept of it enough. Like, I can't put myself in the developer's shoes because I've never really been there. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts or anything like that on what you kind of see happening. I know you touched on it a little bit, but if there's anything in addition to it that you see.
Yeah, it's my complete guess, but
Sure.
I would say probably, call it 50% of projects are at least going to take a much harder look at what they're spending money on, why they're spending money, if the project actually has legs. I think a lot of the marginal projects are going to they're probably going to drop the contract on the land. They're probably going to not spend any more money on it. We've done that on at least one project that was very slow moving. We were having trouble getting political approval, and it was like, you know what, like we're not going to get political approval anytime soon, so it's not worth our time or money to keep it under contract. So that's an example of, where we probably would have kept pushing it had we not been under quarantine and not had any idea when we were going to actually be able to have an in-person meeting with a councilperson. So those are examples of where I think, maybe half of the projects are going to either drop out or come to a halt. And then you're going to have some that are going to be ready to go, they're going to delay until they know what's going on and they know where the new normal is. And I think that's same with acquisition. We're going through an acquisition. We got under contract right as this was all happening, and I've basically, renegotiated our contract based on what's going on now and just tried to prolong the contract because we want, time is us learning of what the new normal is. So I think you're going to see everything's delayed, and then a lot of the marginal stuff is going to drop off.
Yeah, I think that's good. Another question, I want to change it up slightly. Have you ever looked at opportunity zones in conjunction with some of the stuff you've been doing with the affordable side, or not really?
Yes, I've been to a few conferences. We closed an opportunity zone deal. What was that? December 2018, 192 unit deal in Lafayette, Louisiana. It's kind of like what I've heard a lot of other developers say is it was already going to happen. The opportunity zone just happened to overlay where the project was. It helped returns for our investors, and on the affordable deals, it's typically a bank that's investing. So sometimes it's harder to find banks with capital gains that need that as part of their investment package. So that was a little bit more difficult, but it did help the deal. But we haven't done anything since because it doesn't add as much of a benefit as we thought, because again, you're dealing with banks who sometimes they have capital gains, sometimes they don't. They're typically don't have as many capital gains or as much need to fill that as some individuals or private equity groups. And then on top of that, but I will say it does match up well with the affordable because they're typically redeveloping parts of town. That's where a federal government incentivizes you to actually develop workforce housing. And so it matches up well with that. So that's how we did the Lafayette deal, but we haven't done anything since.
So when you're talking about the banks, are you talking about them being the lending side, or are you talking about them being like the equity side where they get the benefit of the capital gains and the opportunity zones?
Both. So the way the tax credit program works is banks are actually required to invest in tax credits.
Okay.
The Community Reinvestment Act of 1986 basically said banks cannot redline lower income or parts of town that they don't want to do banking in. They did it for, really the early 1900s up to like the 1980s. They basically would redline parts of town that they're like, nope, no loans, no mortgages, no branches, no nothing in this part of town because they deemed it higher risk. And so CRA Act of 1986 basically said, no, you have to invest in all parts of town if you want to be able to bank in that metro. So because of that, banks are required to invest in our tax credits. So it gives a little bit of built-in demand for our credits, but they're typically the ones investing. You occasionally have insurance groups or just yield investors. We had like Sherwin-Williams one time invest in a deal. Google has invested previously, but typically it's more banks because they're required to get those tax credits.
Gotcha. Okay. I did not realize that. I didn't understand.
The tax credit world, it's challenging. It's not, because I've had people, I have a couple friends and they think you're in real estate. They're like, oh, have you heard of these tax credit things? I'm like, if you're bringing that up to me, you have no idea what you're talking about. Because I could see Chris's face a little, because, I said the banks don't, they don't invest in our deals. They give us the money for the loan. But I know the tax credit world is, it's its own world in itself. And there's definitely super complexity behind it. And it's not, and I don't understand it myself, but I could tell by the way the question was asked, it was like, wait a second.
Yeah. I was like, what?
Okay, I got it. Now let's get on to the next subject.
Yeah. Can you give me like a 60-second lesson, like explaining the tax credits and how it's structured? Cause like, it's not gelling up here. Inside the head.
No, yeah, definitely. Basically you take everything you know about multifamily investing and you like turn it upside down. And Perfect. That's tax credit investing and tax credit development. So really, it's more or less, it's the government incentivizing developers, nonprofits, housing authorities, different groups that want to provide affordable housing. It's incentivizing them to do it. And in return, you're capping your rents at 30% of individuals' paychecks, monthly paychecks.
Yep.
And so in return for doing that, they give you a tax credit, which on the type we do, there's two different types of credits, but I'll just talk about the one we do, which provides 40% of your cost of construction in a credit. And so we then turn around and sell the credits to the banks, to the investors, and they give us some agreed upon rate of return. Basically, like for each dollar of credit, they'll give us like 90 cents back in cash equity that helps pay for the development. So they get $1 for dollar write-off with the credit on their taxes. And really, because I say it's the exact opposite of multifamily investing, is because our bank investors who buy the credits, they actually don't want any of the return, any of the cash flow. They want the tax credits, they want the losses, and they want the depreciation. That is what is most important to them. It's almost like these investments are to help offset all their other income from other things the bank does. And so we as the developer, we don't get, the GP owner, we don't get any of those benefits, but we get the cash flow. And we also get a developer fee. So in essence, we're building something, let's say it costs $50 million to build. The end value, because of the capped rents, is like $30 million. But the credits cover the $20 million roughly, call it.
Now, so you did a really good job explaining, because when we were early on in the business, our management company did a ton of this, and they sold a ton of credit. Blue Ridge Management, one of the first properties we did. So they did this, and our manager at the time, she was a president of Blue Ridge. She ended up working for another company that did it. She ended up being the president of development. I'm sorry, Blue Ridge. Doesn't matter. Long story short, she explained it to us. And at that point, 7 years ago, I was like, nah, too difficult. Don't want to do that. Give me a rent roll and tell me how, and the neighbor's charging 10% more in rents. I'll buy that one. So much easier. But not taking advantage of the depreciation and the losses, right? Because that's the benefit of being a real estate investor to a degree.
Yeah.
Do you, and you guys, do you guys do something to offset that? Because if you're just getting the cash flow and the fees, that's taxed at a relatively,
Yeah.
it's taxed. What, and then maybe this is too personal or not, and tell me though, what do you guys do to offset that component? Because I know that's a huge benefit. And we have some investors that just say, what are the depreciation in the first year? Because the cash flow, it is what it is to them. They're looking, they have a ton of gains across the board. They want to offset stuff. So what, you're on that side of the coin as well. You guys give up that benefit to take advantage of the tax credit. What are you guys looking at, or you personally or individually or whatever it is? How do you take it, try and take advantage of the other side of the coin?
Yeah, and that's where the acquisitions come into play, because that's exactly right. I mean, if we were only doing the development portion of it, then we would have a pretty good tax liability. So that's where we're doing acquisitions, really to supplement our development business. We do about 80% development, 20% acquisition. But yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, if we were only doing that, it would almost be like we're any other business not in real estate as far as taxable income.
No, that's interesting, because it's like you said, that the 20% acquisitions, that probably does a good number on the earned income. So I think it's important to realize that as a tax credit developer, you do leave some stuff on the table, but you're providing a great service. So there's something to be said about that. And I think it's awesome. And I think now you've explained it a little bit better to most people listening, because if people hear that, they're going to go online and they're going to be like, we're building shit tomorrow, right? We're going to get government money. This is great. A little bit more complicated.
Yeah. I tell anybody, I'm like, I'll love to help you get into it, but you have to make sure you have patience and you're passionate about it and you're willing to invest like 5 years into this at least. Because it's a long lead time. I mean, when I started working with that development group out of college, it took me 2 years to get my first deal closed. And that's just starting construction, then another 2 years to build it, a year to lease up. So these things are really a commitment. So I always warn everybody, make sure you're really committed to this.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I'm sure there's hurdles in itself working with counties and governments, right?
Oh, yeah.
Those people aren't, let's call it, incentivized by time to get things done. So yeah, I'm sure, you spoke about a couple things right there, right? Passionate, you have the time and patience. And I think in today's world, that word patience is few and far between, why would I wait if I could, there's got to be an app to do it for me, right? So I think it's important that people understand that, because it is, anytime you involve a local county and or, a federal government.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Not to mention HUD. If you do.
And HUD in itself. I mean, even that's another, those three components. Basically, like you said, patience is probably an endearing term for what it could potentially be.
Yeah. We're going through the third HUD loan I've worked on right now. HUD 221D4, and they're just, they're bare to go through. And I jokingly tell everybody, I'm like, yeah, that's how I got my gray hair at a young age. But at the end of the day, you get 40-year debt and a whole bunch of other benefits. So
we've looked at a couple deals that had those loans, and I would love to do it, but it's difficult, right? It's got to be the perfect situation, because in what we do, try and get a seller to buy into a 9-month closing for them to go through rip through you, and then some of the restrictions to the loan as well. But if you do put that in place, especially at a young age, I mean, you talk about the future, pending catastrophic disaster. I mean, having a completely paid off property in 40 years, not much to worry about with that. So I think there's a lot of compelling sides, but you got to understand the other side of the coin too. Because, I joke around and I say the one thing in this business, I don't care if it's apartments, tax credits, single family flips, whatever you're doing, you're not going to wake up tomorrow. It's going to be sitting there on your doorstep, right? You're going to have to go find it, figure it out and find it. So that's interesting, but they're great product when you can do them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's a phenomenal place to wrap up. You've probably left me with more questions than answers, but that's always a good thing. I hope anybody
we can do it again.
Yeah, we can do it again. We'll just do a Blackboard session of just Evan breaking down how to buy and invest in tax credits and affordable housing and all that stuff. But no, I think, look, if this doesn't get you at least a little bit interested to go do some research, I don't know what else to tell you because it's making me itching to understand. So, Evan, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. Where can people learn more about you, follow you, listen to your podcast, and all that fun stuff?
Yeah. Again, thank you for having me on. Also, to what you just said about research, that's something where I'm really going to start pumping out more content of how to do affordable, what it is, how to invest in it. So if anybody listening is interested in that, we'll put that up shortly at holladayventures.com. That's our real estate company. And then if you're interested in the podcast, Monumental, evanholliday.com. Chris is coming on soon.
I am.
John, we may need to have you on there next. And those are the two biggest places. And then also Instagram. I'm very active there at Evan Holladay.
Love it. Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for listening to the episode. If you are not already subscribed, would love it if you would take the time to go do that. Leave a review if you don't mind. If you are already subscribed, would love it if you'd send it to a few friends, family, colleagues that you think would like it as well. Evan, once again, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, love it.